Behavior Genetics, Part 4, Personality Traits and Heredity, Personality Psychology, Dr. Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. The most simple calculation for heritability is simply the ratio of genetic variance for a characteristic divided by the phenotypic variance. In other words, does the individual have the genes that look like the characteristic squared? So if someone had genes for a characteristic that were 1, and there was just one bit of genetic variance, and there was a 1 for phenotypic variance, you'd have perfect heritability. A more useful calculation of heritability that we're going to use in this class, it's also in your textbook, is Falconer's Index. Falconer's Index is simply heredity equals 2 times the difference between correlations between identical twin pairs and fraternal twin pairs. So you take the twins and you line them up so you have twin 1, twin 2, you correlate those, and then you take that correlation between identical twin pairs, fraternal twin pairs, subtract it, multiply it by 2, and you have a rough index of heritability. Now, the textbook cites some findings from Bouchard's Minnesota twin study where they looked at large numbers of twins who had been reared apart. The Jim twins were included in this group. They were an initial part of it. And you see that for all of these characteristics as measured by psychological scales, you get pretty good heritability until you get down to very social variables like social closeness. Now, I've mentioned one of my personality heroes, Marvin Zuckerman. Marvin Zuckerman is the individual who has developed the notion of sensation seeking. And he's written a book that's now in its 2nd edition called The Psychobiology of Personality. In my opinion, it's one of the best books about the basic biology of personality out there. And there's an absolutely stunningly magnificent chapter on behavior genetics. And to his credit, in one area of that chapter, what Zuckerman does is take all of the twin studies, the major twin studies conducted before he published his book, and kind of collapse them to look at overall genetic effects. Now, when you do this, you have to make a lot of compromises. And what Zuckerman did was kind of recast the variables in these studies, hobbled together 3 big traits. So let's look at these traits and then the results. The first is positive emotionality. And you can see it's things like extroversion, well-being, social potency, nurturance, empathy, stuff like that. Negative emotionality is marked by stress reactions, alienation, neuroticism, things like that. And impulsive, unrestricted sensation seeking is a mix of these kinds of scales. Eysenk's psychoticism, Zuckerman's own sensation seeking. On the opposite end, you have control, harm avoidance, traditionalism. So, memorize this chart. It'll be covered in detail on the exam. I'm just teasing you. This is a great font of information. There are probably, I've never counted all the twin pairs, but there's well over 20,000 twin pairs in these studies by various researchers over the years. And if you read this chart, you're going to see some pretty amazing things. Let's look first at Lowen and Nichols across the top. You see the average ages of the subjects, the number of identical twin pairs, the number of fraternal twin pairs, and since the number is pairs, that's why you get an odd number of twins. Then you see the correlations between twins for the three variables we just defined. And is a column for identical twins and a column for fraternal twins. So you take that across and you see that for positive emotionality, you get a 0.61 correlation with identical twins, only a 0.25 with fraternals. For negative emotionality, you get a 5.4 correlation with identicals and a 2.2 with fraternal twins. Finally, for impulsivity, sensation seeking, you get a 0.54 for identical twins versus a 0.32. Well, the thing to look at really is the bottom line, where Zuckerman looks at the median correlations across all of these thousands of twin pairs and calculates Falconer's index. To make it easier to see, I replicated this on the slide here, and you can see that across all of these twin pairs, for positive emotionality, you get a 0.54 correlation for identicals, 0.19 for fraternals. The resulting Falconer index is 0.7, or about 70% of the variance in positive emotionality is due to genetics. Similar but not as strong finding for negative emotionality. You get 4.622 and a 4.8 Falconer. Still very respectable, almost half of the variance. And finally, unrestricted sensation seeking, you have 5.6 versus 0.27 or a 5.9. Almost 60% of the variance is due to genes for sensation seeking. And this really is a good guideline. If you look at all the studies talked about in your textbook and other places, if we're just going to sum the general results, between half and 60% of the variation in scores for big personality traits and characteristics is heritable. Now, Borkenau, a German personality psychologist, collected data on twins with his colleagues, and they looked at the differences between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. The difference with their study is they added in the notion of collecting peer reports on each twin pair. And no one up until Borkenau and his colleagues did this study had used observer data in looking at the personality traits of twins. Borkenau also used a version of the Big Five, the Neo-FFI scale, five-factor inventory, and you see that there's pretty good evidence for heritability across these traits, and this is one of the articles you'll be reading for this unit. These are intriguing findings. The idea that over half of the variance in scores for our major personality traits are due to our genes is amazing. We can't forget the importance of the environment, though, especially the formative environment on our personalities. And as we know, we can learn to cope with some of our biological characteristics. In our last unit, we're going to talk about 3 different ways that the genes you have interact systematically with the environment. That's really interesting stuff. We'll see you next time in Personality Psych. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020, Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.